Hey, welcome back, one and all. We are trudging along. Better than that, we're gonna hit the lightning round tonight. I'm very excited to be doing a triple header tonight. We're going to be talking about. We'll be hitting three videos tonight, back to back to back, with probably nary more than time for a refill in between. And these next three letters are going to go together very well. We're talking letter R, S, and T, because we're going to be talking about three different types of hauntings. And so it's kind of fun, the idea of doing all three of them in one sitting. So we'll be telling a lot of ghost stories, sharing so many stories and theories and concepts and all that. As always, though, I do want to encourage everybody to post a comment, to like. That is always very helpful to me. If you can also share this around anybody that you know that loves history, loves mysterious sides of history, and maybe trying to get to the bottom of some of the parts of our universe, our life that we don't know enough about yet, because we just we haven't crossed over. So how could we possibly know? So tonight, we are going to be starting with residual hauntings for the letter R. R is for residual hauntings. And a residual haunting, I believe, and this is kind of perhaps an unusual thing to say, but I think residual hauntings in time will not be considered a ghost story. They won't be considered paranormal. They will be considered part of biology that at the time, our current time, we just don't know enough about it yet. So it gets lumped into the world of the paranormal just because we don't get it. We don't have enough information yet. But as you'll see as we talk about this, residual hauntings are so commonplace, and it does not, in no part of it does it involve someone who has died coming back to make their presence known. There's no talk here about an afterlife or a consciousness, anything like that. So therefore, I believe it is just kind of part of science and part of what makes up humanity that we don't fully comprehend yet. So, but by all means, they can still be creepy and scary. And so we're going to talk about, of course, we're going to talk about the theory, the concept of what one is, but then we're going to talk about some really well-known or interesting or famous ones, and including one or two that I may have been witness to myself. So the idea of a residual haunting is that some moment took place in time, in history, and it could be recent history, it could be long ago history, but it was incredibly emotionally charged, so much so that the world around it is still holding on to those scars, is still holding on to those emotions. um, what makes something what makes an event so big that it leads to a residual haunting or not, that's part of what we don't know, which is why this is still yet an unprovable thing. um, but that is kind of the concept, and I think the idea of residual hauntings, um, even if they aren't accompanied by seeing something visually or having one of those crazy experiences that you tell your friends about around the campfire, sometimes it can be much more subtle than that. It can be a feeling, and so I guess I'll talk about it personally, and because I think this is one of the things that got me to believe in the paranormal. So I went out and I did my documentary on haunted Chicago back in the late '90s, and I had some experiences that I couldn't quite explain away, but still, trying to always be the pragmatic, level-headed person, I still tried to maintain an even keel and feel like, well, I think that there's something out there, but I don't know. How could you know? Um, but then once I started to understand more about what residual hauntings were and observe around me a little bit without being a sensitive person, I thought, okay, well, this would line up. And my case is not, again, this one's not a ghost story, but it is an idea of what a residual haunting can be about. Again, emotions being left behind in an area, and sometimes events play out as well, the more spooky things. But for me, the one I'll start out with before I ratchet it up to 11 and tell some really scary ones, just talks about one day I was in college still, and I was a film production major, writing and producing for TV, and I was in the middle of a project. I was editing away and I was in the zone. And when you're an editor, it's so hard to get to that point and you don't want to leave it when you're there, when things are actually rolling. And I had to go to my job. I had to stop my homework and go to work, and which was a great job. But still, you don't want to, get out of that moment. So I was kind of in a bad mood that I was going into work, and where I worked was Zany's Comedy Club. I was not a comic, but I helped kind of, run the show, get the show off on time, make sure that sound and light levels, all that stuff was good, and then the more mundane parts of it too. That is not even worth talking about. But so I loved my job, but I was in a bad mood because I didn't want to go to work. I wanted to stay working on this project I was in the middle of. So I walked in the door grumpy. I walked past the ticket counter, angry, in my mind still very much focused on the my work at home that I was missing. And as soon as I walked into the showroom, so where the stage is and where the audience would be, this was hours and hours before the show or to start. I was instantly in a good mood. I had a positive feeling impressed upon me. So yes, this is a ghost story. This is a paranormal story, I should say. And it's not negative. It's not scary, but it caught me off guard. It caught me by surprise. I'm like, why am I suddenly happy? Like, I'm very thrilled that I'm here and I'm in a really good mood. And it happened, I noticed, as if I was, wet versus dry jumping into the ocean. I knew the moment it happened, it was when I walked into that room. That room, and the comedy club had been there for 15 or so years at this point. So that room holding, 400 people per show times 6 shows a year or 6 shows a week. This is a room that held millions upon millions of laughs. And I think that residual haunting in that sense is something that I felt. And it's something I've observed time and time again. Sometimes you might be if you're in the middle of work. I remember I was working on a documentary once when I was living in Hawaii, and I had to go through one of these hotels, one of the big hotels in Waikiki. And as soon as I walked into the lobby, again, I just felt happy. Even though I was in work mode, I was focused on what I needed to get done, what I needed to write or record. And then you think about all the people, all the families that have come through there, all the tourists that have come through there. Nobody goes to a place like that and feels bad. They're there and they're happy, and that positive emotion is left just lingering in the space. So, so that's something that made me think, okay, the residual haunting thing makes sense to me. And here's on the much more negative side, Harpo Studios, where the Oprah Winfrey Show recorded for, I don't know if it was the entire time, but a lot of it, probably the entire run of that long running series. That building had a much darker past than being a television studio. And in this moment, I should have looked it up. I can't remember what it originally started out as, but it gained its perhaps biggest notoriety in the early 1900s as a temporary morgue for the Eastland disaster. This is the worst maritime disaster in United States history, not counting at times of peace, I should say, is the largest tragedy during peacetime in American maritime history. And it was this very long and tall ship called the Eastland that had a history of close calls. And but fortunately, it wasn't going to be out on the ocean. It was going to take a group of passengers from Chicago over to Michigan City, Indiana, for a company picnic. That was the idea, anyway. And so this is, I believe, it was 1912. The boat began to fill up with passengers, and they were already, as it was docked in the Chicago River I'm probably going to get it wrong, but I think it was LaSalle Street. The boat was they were having to compensate, letting out some of their ballast and here or there as the people were shifting just while it was still docked. And eventually, for some reason, and there's a lot of debate over what it was that caused this, but some activity caused a lot of people on the deck to rush over to the one side of the boat, away from the pier, away from land, I guess. And the boat just rolled over right there in place. It sat there, beached in feet and feet of mud. And a lot of people couldn't swim, But way more tragically, there were tons and tons of people that were below deck already. This is a tall cruise liner, and those people were trapped inside the ship that was now on its side. And I mean, some of the stories that you hear about the firefighters that come to try to rescue people or help out, they're standing on this ship that's on its side. It's not underwater, but it's just on its side and filling up with water. They could hear people as they're standing on the side of the ship. They can hear people pounding up at them from within, but they just couldn't get down to them. They couldn't cut through the metal in time. And in all, the estimate is around 888 people died, including 22 entire families. Because again, this was going to be a company picnic. This is going to be a fun, positive, jovial thing. And just incredible, tremendous amount of loss of life. Much more than the infrastructure of death in Chicago could handle at that time. So a number of different buildings became temporary morgues, and one of them is Harpo Studios. And I still need to find this because I've read it written that Oprah once did a show on Halloween or around Halloween where she talks about the haunted history of her building and shares some of her own experiences there, or some of her staff's experiences there. This episode probably would have taken place in the 90s or even 80s. So if anybody has a link to that, I have never been able to find it, but I would love to see that, even just to verify that that is a true thing. But what the claims are that people in the hallways, not in the studio itself, but just in the building, at times will be overwhelmed. They would hear the sounds of hundreds upon thousands of people shuffling, walking slowly down the halls. And sometimes it's even accompanied by the smell of era perfume. So what's going on here? Are there really thousands of people walking around this building? No, I think the more accepted idea is that there's a residual haunting that that there's, I mean, and the reality is that while thousands of people may have come through here, it only takes one person to leave that incredibly intense psychic impression behind in the building that affects the building for who knows how much longer. So that person's experiences, it's what they were feeling. So it wasn't even one of the victims of the Eastland disaster that's causing this haunting, but it's somebody that was probably among the line of people that was walking, shuffling through this building, looking to identify a body of a loved one. And what they heard was, you imagine it would be solemn and very quiet, just people walking around. And apparently they must have smelled the perfume, whether it was their perfume or the perfume of somebody that was in line with them. That moment in time, people today are able to pick up on. So it's kind of an interesting thing that you're able to share a memory with somebody else that came before you, that it's not a memory you have, but you're able to share that memory. There's some elements of that memory. Sometimes it's accompanied with full visual apparitions as well, which is the case with Peg Entwistle. Now, I think I talked about her briefly. I've given lots of speeches on her kind of recently too, so I don't know if I've covered it in my A to Z series here. But Peg Entwistle was an actress in Hollywood. And it's true that she was a struggling actress. She was a very accomplished theater actress, and that should not be overlooked, because people always paint this picture that she was some wannabe and she couldn't hack it in Hollywood and she ended up committing suicide. The reality was she was a very established stage performer on the East Coast, and she decided to go give the silver screen a try. Unfortunately, it did kind of burn bridges back home in her theater community. So she kind of felt like she couldn't go back if things didn't work out. But in addition to that, and probably bigger than the career side of it, was that she was going through a really messy divorce. And she found out that her husband, soon to be ex-husband, was now claiming a child support for a child that wasn't hers, that she didn't know he had. So her world was upside down. At this time, she was living on Beechwood Canyon Drive, which is just north of Hollywood Boulevard and the 101. Her story revolves around the Hollywood sign, that major icon that is a symbol of America as much as it is a symbol of the entertainment industry. It's just such an iconic site. Nobody doesn't know the Hollywood sign. And Beechwood Canyon Drive, which I've gone to, where she was living at the time before her death, and the sign is just looming over her, the small house that she was sharing with her uncle. One night she decided, she told her uncle that she was going to go out for a pack of smokes and never came back. And instead of going down the hill into Hollywood to a convenience store or something, she walked up the hill and then walked a basically a death march up through the mountain in Griffith Park up to the Hollywood sign. She found a workman's ladder that was left behind, propped up against the letter H. She climbed up the ladder, climbed onto the H, took one last look over Hollywood, jumped off to her death. Unfortunately, it was a slow death. It was not an instant death. She fell about 150 feet into the canyon below, pulverized her hips, and she was not able to move. She was in shock. We don't really know how long she writhed there in pain. Hopefully, she wasn't feeling too much of it, but she eventually did expire before anybody could find her. And it was a sensation in the media after this happened, because there was a small amount of time where people didn't know a body was found and we didn't know who it was. And when I give my presentation, I talk about how newspapers across the country they latched onto the story so quickly. And the idea, boiling it down beyond what the reality, but beyond the humanity of it, say, hey, failed Hollywood actress jumps off the Hollywood sign. And that's kind of what they boiled it down to. They were looking for space in anywhere in their newspaper to get this story in. And I've got photos of it in the sports section of different newspapers, just because there was some available square footage there, which is bizarre. But anyway, so today, jump ahead to today, people have observed Peg Entwistle. And, I did the hike up to the Hollywood sign because I wanted to walk in her shoes. And in doing that, you can't do the exact hike because you can't get all the way to the Hollywood sign. Now it's got motion detectors, it's fenced off. You can't go and jump off the Hollywood sign. But something that was interesting to note while doing this hike was, again, they usually boil it down so quickly. Depressed, failed actors commit suicide. She had a mile walk up a mountain. She was wearing high-heeled shoes too, so this was not an easy hike. She had all the time in the world to get over an impulse and say, no, what am I doing? She planned this. She knew what she was going to do. She was taking her life, or the end of it, into her own hands and jumping. So to this day, people continue to see Peg Entwistle walking up Beechwood Canyon Drive, walking through the mountain in Griffith Park. And people have even seen a figure stand on the letter H and jump off. If you look along the ridge of this mountain, you will see the very famous Griffith Observatory. You really know it from the James Dean Rebel Without a Cause thrilling conclusion. But if you can see the Hollywood sign very well from here. And this is where people out on that observation deck at the Griffith Observatory would, while they might be trying to look into Beverly Hills and Hollywood and see glamorous LA, they could look along the ridge and they would see someone jump off the letter H, call the police, fire rescue would come to try to hopefully tend to an injured person, probably just do a body recovery, and then up finding no one. So no one actually jumped. It was a replay of the event. It was a residual haunting. And there's some really, really engaging testimonials from people that are hikers that end up bumping into Peg on her death march, and they try to say hi to her. She looks, real as us, even though she's in some clothes that might not be conventional for a hike. But they don't realize that she's not a real person, and that you're looking back into time if you're observing a residual haunting. It's really a fascinating thing. Sam Warner, down on Hollywood Boulevard at the Pacific Theater, which was the Warner Pacific Theater originally, he was one of the Warner brothers. They were building, this is one of my stories, that as well, but this is also a story from my LA Hauntings tour. I'm very fascinated with this building, which is unfortunately was damaged in the Northridge earthquake, has been closed since then. They used to have the lobby open for some church services, but even the church is not in there anymore. I do hope that they will renovate, fix up this place and open again, because it's so important to Hollywood cinema history. It was built to house the premiere to The Jazz Singer, the first ever talking picture. And going over a lot of details, Sam Warner was somebody that was really a driving force. There were 5 Warner brothers, and he was the guy that really urged them to go bigger, better, take some big risks, and make a name for themselves. And clearly he did a good job, as Warner Brothers is still very much around today. Eventually, production delays or construction delays made it obvious that they were not going to be able to the theater would not be ready to host the premiere of the movie. So they hosted it in one of their other theaters in New York, but Sam stayed behind. The plan was that he was going to continue overseeing the construction of the building, and then the day before the premiere, he would fly out to New York and join his brothers for the premiere to usher in the world of sound, the world of talkies. Unfortunately, he was not present at the premiere, and actually none of the Warner Brothers were present at the premiere because they were tending to Sam's death. He had an aneurysm right there in the building and died on the operating table. So absolutely tragic. Eventually, that theater was open, and there's a dedication to Sam, a plaque in the lobby, which I would love to see. But again, it's been closed since well before I was ever in LA. But when it was open, people would see a very frantic, very focused Sam Warner walk across the lobby, the hotel lobby, sometimes in front of multiple people at once. So it's not just one person whose mind was or eyes were playing tricks on him, but he would appear around like an entire cleaning crew and walk across the lobby, go to the elevator bank, hit the button, elevator would come down, doors open, he would get inside, press a button, the doors would close, and people on the outside would be able to see that the elevator went up to the floor where he kept his office, which that's amazing because it kind of changes what we think we know about a residual haunting. We think the residual haunting is lost in time. Is a moment in time, and we're seeing a playback of a bygone moment. However, in this instance, it seems like it's residual haunting because Sam is obviously he's still trying to get work done in the office there in the theater, and he doesn't seem to be aware of other people that are around him. However, he can interact with the environment. He can press the button. He knows when the elevator doors open and can come in. So he's still interacting in a way, I mean, very much in a way, with the world as you and I know it today, although it seems like a residual haunting. So I don't know. Where does this one exactly fall? The Chicago Water Tower has an interesting dark, and this might be urban legendy. I've started to wonder a little bit about it. Maybe it's just because other people threw some shade at it, and I wasn't sure. If you don't see it yourself, all you can do is report what other people have claimed. So the Chicago Water Tower, at the time, and I always love saying this, at the time it was built, the Chicago Water Tower, right down there on Michigan Avenue, that iconic stone structure that looks very much like part of a castle, I guess, with a very tall steeple. When it was built, it was the tallest building in America, which is incredible because it's probably only 3 or 4 stories tall, but we are looking at the 1860s here. And today, right across the street is the John Hancock Tower, which I believe is something like 86 stories tall. So it's just incredible to think how far we've come as human beings that can build things in just such a relatively short amount of time. But as the story goes, the Chicago fire breaks out. October 5th, 1871, sweeps across the city, cutting this huge burnt district. We still had hundreds of deaths, but still, it's actually pretty small when you consider it's a major city that was burning to the ground. Lots of buildings, tons of buildings. Everything was wooden. Even the sidewalks were made of wood at this time, and we were in the middle of a drought. And there was also some really big fires just in the weeks leading up to it. And of course, then you can talk about the Peshtigo fire up in Wisconsin, which was a huge tragedy that's super overlooked. Took place on the same night. Anyway, I'm getting off focus because there's just so much to talk about with the story so big. But as the story goes, there were people tending the water tower. There's the pump house building and then the water tower itself. And one guy, knowing that his life could be in jeopardy, made the decision that I'm going to man my post, trying to continue to pump water out to firefighters relatively nearby. I'm sure this isn't going all that far, but I want to try to combat this fire. And eventually the roof of the pump house caved in. It was not made of stone. It burned, caved in. The pump house is done. Water tower is ineffective. But at this point, the man up in the top little bit of the water tower, which has windows in it, knew he was going to burn alive. There was no way out. Even if he didn't physically catch fire, the heat is only going to get worse. And it was probably unbelievably unbearable. And so he did the next best thing, which was he hanged himself to avoid the pain of burning alive. And as the legend goes, people, and this is in the middle of the city today, currently. It is hustle bustle. It is the Mag Mile. It is where all the shopping happens. And again, Hancock Tower is right there. People will look up into that upper window and see the silhouette of a man hanging by a noose. There are some legends that maybe this was a looter that was brought to street justice, but the all of the reports of looting is actually there weren't any. The Fort Sheridan up in Lake Forest, Illinois, they brought down their military to try to stop looting, but the reality was that the whole place for days later was so. First off, what are you going to loot? Everything's burned down, and second off, the whole area was just so hot. People could not get into it for days, and eventually people would be able to go back to their safe, and they would do the combo, and they would open their safe, thinking that everything inside there should be okay. But the metal of the safe was still so hot that when they opened the door, all that influx of oxygen ignited the contents of the safe. So shouldn't have done that. So, but that gives you an idea of how intensely hot this area was. So yes, the hanging figure up in the Chicago Water Tower is a great example of a residual haunting. Now, the most incredible residual haunting I have ever experienced in my life, and one of my favorite personal ghost stories I've ever experienced, takes place on the battlefields of Gettysburg. How's that for the cliffhanger? All right. So I am out there. I was with the girl I was seeing and her family from Virginia. So we took a drive out there on my birthday. This was, oh boy, at this point, many years ago, at least 6 years ago, I guess, 6 or more, on December 2nd. So an interesting thing with residual hauntings is they frequently tie in with dates, an important date on the anniversary of it. It might be more likely that you'll be able to observe a residual haunting. But I'm up there December 2nd. So I expect birthday cards now that you both viewers know my birthday. But so this is not on the anniversary of any battles that were going on in Gettysburg, because that was July 1st through 3rd is when those anniversaries would have taken place. So this is totally off season. And it's important to note it's off season. Not only is it not an anniversary, but it's also not a time that people visit Gettysburg. So it was actually, which coincidentally makes it a great time to visit Gettysburg. There's no crowds. You don't have to make a reservation anywhere. You have the place pretty much to yourself. So you can go to the Gettysburg like Welcome Center tourist area and buy these CDs, and they give you they tell you go to point A, point B, C, D as you drive over the battlefield areas, and you're being told what was going on chronologically, where the battles were taking place and who was doing what. It's a really unique way to spend the day. And we spent the entire day doing this. We stopped for lunch, fortunately. But beyond that, we were just on this self-guided tour that had to have been 6 to 8 hours long, because you frequently want to get out and look around yourself as well. And so now the family is over it, except the dad and I. We are the old fogies. The old fogies want to still check out. We haven't made it to the Gettysburg Address yet. That's the finish line. And by the time we get to the site of Pickett's Charge, it's only the dad and I that are interested in seeing anything anymore. So we get out, and Pickett's Charge is the high water mark of the South for the Civil War. It is the furthest north the Confederacy ever made it. And the really poetic, unique thing is that they were stopped at this small wall that is maybe 3 feet high. But to charge over it, you have to get on top of it and crawl over it. And that's where the Union just held back, and they picked people off as they were trying to go over this wall. And the poetic side is that wall was actually made by a slave. So, wow, I don't know. I always love that little fact. So we get out, we hear the story of Pickett's Charge about exactly what I just told you. And then he and I are looking around, we're looking at the wall, we're just looking out over this big open field that was the battlefield. And I don't know, we just kind of have a moment of quietness, taking in the environment, which I always talk about being an important thing to witnessing something, is you need to feel calm and you need to feel at ease in the location. And right about when he said, "So, I don't know, you wanna head in? Go to the next place?" We hear boom, boom, boom. Sounds like cannon fire off in the distance, and off in the distance that we just came from. So we know that nobody is over there. We know that there's no reenactments. Oh, and at this point too, like I said, it's late in the day. The sun is still, well, it's a rainy day. It's a drizzly day. So it's cloudy, but the sun is getting very low in the sky. It's not dark yet, but it's not a fun time of day. It's December, drizzly, not sunny. So there's nobody out at this point, and we also know that there's no reenactments. We know that there's nobody in the location where we hear the sounds coming from. And of course, I'm holding a camcorder in my hand on pause. So I pick it up, hit record, wait, just nothing. And he's a skeptic. I should note that. But he wouldn't. He heard it. Like, that was weird, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. So I keep rolling on the camera, keep rolling, and once again, right about when we thought, well, let's head on back. Boom, we start to hear cannon fire again. Except this time it's not stopping. It's, I don't know how many booms over and over again. You could tell that there were, it's not just one being reloaded. There's several that start to go off, these big bassy booms. And soon you start to hear the lighter pops, pops, pops of gunfire. And eventually you don't hear any individual anything anymore. It's the sound is just the sound. It's this mass of chaos that's going on. It's incredible. We are just standing there transfixed, feet frozen to the ground, listening. And I am rolling on this, and I do record it. Thank God. This is one of my most profound moments. And eventually the sound fades and stops. He, the skeptic, runs back to the car, swings the door open where the rest of the family is sitting, and says, "They're still fighting out here." And which tells you right there, like, we didn't have to have a conversation of what were those sounds. He heard it and identified it the exact same way like I did. That is one of the most incredible paranormal experiences I've ever had. And when it comes to a residual haunting, that's what that is. I mean, and who knows? Who knows where that sound came from? Oh, and then the amazing thing was, we get back in the car and we hit play on the CD, and the narrator starts talking about Pickett's charge, and talks about where the fighting started before the big charge up the hill, to this fence line. And it started right where we heard, in the location where we heard the fighting start. So we heard the beginning of Pickett's charge. What an incredible moment that was. I want to talk next. I'll end on the story of the Grimes sisters, and I'm not going to get into details because it's just horrifically sad. We are talking about, the year is, I believe it's 1958. Barbara and Patricia Grimes. They are just young kids growing up in the 50s in the south suburbs of Chicago, and one day they go missing. There is such a huge manhunt to try to find where these girls went. One of the theories, because they were huge Elvis fans, and I think they were supposed to go see an Elvis movie in the theater when they went missing. Elvis himself actually went on TV telling these little girls, "Go home to your mama. You're worrying her." Of course, we'll jump ahead to after the manhunt. Nobody's ever brought to justice. Their bodies are found in a ditch, not actually all that far from Bachelor's Grove I believe it's the town of Flossmoor. If it's not Flossmoor, it's near there in the south suburbs of Chicago. And the incredible thing is that people have witnessed those post-mortem. Well, it wasn't post-mortem because these girls were thrown off out of a car into the ditch where they died of exposure. So they were alive when they were placed in this area, and just kind of just being out there, they were in shock, and then exposed from exposure, they died. They passed away, and so people to this day have witnessed. Usually it's audio only, but it actually has some people have actually seen this horrific sight, which is a car pulling up, a guy getting out, pulling two sacks of something out of the trunk, throwing it over the ditch, over the little guardrail, and then speeding off. So that is, I believe, well, that's absolutely a residual haunting. When you have a phantom inanimate object like that, like a car, I think I that's my belief. That's a little bit of a tell to me that it might be a residual haunting. So, and personally, I trying to be a little bit silver lining about it. I hope that this dude is in hell, wherever he is, and that he is actually reliving the worst moment of his life. He's forced to do that for eternity, and some of us lucky folks get to witness that. But I am excited about this haunting, this residual haunting, because first off, I think we must be cluing in to the observation, the memory of the killer in this case, because the girls may not have been mentally with it enough to be able to observe this moment. Um, so I wonder if somebody can observe this horrible moment. What happens if they look really closely? Will they be able to see the license plate? If they can see the license plate, maybe we can finally solve this long dead cold case. So those are some residual hauntings. Again, I started on an up note and ended really dark. Maybe I should have swapped that around. But I'm going to take a very short break, and I'm going to be back right here with the letter S, which is a different type of haunting altogether. Perhaps not of our world as we know it. It's about shadow people. One of my favorite things to talk about, and also one of my other most intense paranormal experiences in my life. I get to share one of my own stories. Thanks for watching. Hit that bell, subscribe, like, share. I'm going to be right back in just a couple minutes to talk about shadow people.